Welcome to DEFCON 3. I'm KT McFarland. Coming off a significant victory against ISIS in the contested northern Iraqi town of Sinjar, Kurdish forces seem to be building momentum against the terrorists. Well, joining us to discuss is Oubai Shahbandar. He's an advisor with the Free Syria Foreign Mission, and he's recently returned from the region. So what's the latest? It looked like for months that ISIS was making great inroads and seizing territory and everybody else was on the defensive. But now are the Kurdish forces regaining the initiative and pushing ISIS back? Oubai, what's your assessment having just returned from the region?
Well, KT, it certainly looks like that ISIS is not this unstoppable juggernaut that many had made it out to seem. Now, while it is still a very dangerous terrorist force, we are seeing some significant losses that are being inflicted against ISIS in northern Iraq, specifically in the Sinjar area and on the Iraqi-Syrian border. Now, what's happening here is that the close air support that is being provided by American aircraft is having an impact on the ground because it is being coordinated by Kurdish security forces. Masoud Barzani, the president of the Iraqi Kurdistan Regional Government, has been meeting with senior American government officials, diplomats, and military representatives. And what we're seeing here is an effective counterattack against an area that ISIS had hoped to turn as a vassal to its so-called Islamic State. Now, this damage is significant. Why? Because ISIS depends on this area to move personnel from northwest Iraq into eastern Syria and vice versa. So the fact that Kurdish security forces have taken this area in Sinjar just weeks after ISIS had declared it a major victory for themselves is very significant. But there's still a lot more to be done. ISIS is still very strong and entrenched in northeastern Syria. So it remains to be seen.
Then talk to me about that border and that sort of battlefront, if you will. What's the situation in the in Syria?
Syria is the center of gravity for ISIS. That's where ISIS has its headquarters in eastern Syria, specifically in the town of Raqqa and on the lower Euphrates River Valley. Over there, it's a completely different story. Now, American aircraft are flying over Syria. They are attacking ISIS, and it is having an impact. But the campaign there isn't as comprehensive as it is in Iraq. In fact, some of the Free Syrian Army commanders that I've spoken to on the ground have expressed frustration that the international coalition against ISIS and that the United States isn't doing more to coordinate with its partners on the ground, specifically the Free Syrian Army, that are fighting side by side with Kurdish Peshmerga forces against ISIS in the Syrian town of Kobani. Now, ISIS has suffered some losses in eastern Syria, but you don't have that same close air support between American aircraft and local forces on the ground that you have in Iraq. And we're seeing some negative repercussions of that. In fact, just earlier this month, while I was out in the region, we saw new revelations of this major massacre that was committed by ISIS against hundreds of Sunni Arab tribesmen in eastern Syria that had risen up against ISIS. Now, these tribesmen in eastern Syria have asked for American support. They've asked for international support. They haven't gotten it, and ISIS is slaughtering them en masse. So we really need a refocus of American firepower against ISIS in eastern Syria. Otherwise, ISIS will simply regroup, refit, and use eastern Syria as a launching pad back into Iraq.
You know, a few weeks ago, we were getting initial reports that ISIS was not only good fighters, but they were good governors, that they were establishing a nation state, they were providing social services, and the people, the Sunni Arabs in the region, were in fact welcoming them. But now more recent reports are saying that they're not doing so well, that the water isn't working, the electricity isn't working, that the Sunni tribes are getting fed up with the sort of overly religious, overly strict governance of ISIS. What are you hearing?
That's very true. On the Syrian-Turkish border, I heard from many Syrian activists that there is an underground movement in the areas that ISIS controls in eastern Syria to fight against ISIS. You're seeing more and more graffiti denouncing ISIS in villages and towns that they control. There are tribesmen that are resisting ISIS. I mean, ISIS has tried to present itself as a real state. The reality is they don't have as much money as they used to. They're suffering because of the airstrikes against their oil refineries in eastern Syria, and they simply don't know how to govern. It's one thing to control an area, a village in the countryside. It's another thing to control a major town like Raqqa or like Mosul that has over 1 million people. It's going to lead to backlash. I was there in Iraq in 2007, and we saw a very similar dynamic. ISIS's medieval view of the world is simply going to lead to a backlash against them. Now, it is up to the United States and to its international allies to leverage and take advantage of this local backlash against ISIS. And that means that America has to partner with moderate Sunni Arabs in eastern Syria to take ground against ISIS. We're seeing some movement towards that front. General John Allen, President Obama's special representative to the anti-ISIS coalition, has said that partnering with local forces and local Sunni Arabs is a key element, and we need to see more of that in Syria.
Well, I just want to point out, I was in Israel last week on the Syrian-Israeli border and saw towns that are now controlled by ISIS on Israel's border. Oubai, thanks for joining us. And for more about this developing story, stick with FoxNews.com. I'm KT McFarland. Thanks for watching DEF CON 3.